Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Midland Cultural Center, and welcome to A Day in the Life. Now, here is the host of A Day in the Life, Fred Hacker.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Midland Cultural Center, and welcome to A Day in the Life. We're also delighted to welcome those who are tuning in on Rogers Community Television and watching this program on television. We have a really special guest this evening, somebody who has made a name for himself, not just here in Canada, but throughout North America. Would you please welcome IndyCar driver, Canada's own James Hinchcliffe. Welcome.
Hello, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Have a seat. Well, they seem pretty excited about seeing you, James.
I paid most of them to be here, so I'm glad. Checks in the mail, guys. Don't worry.
It shows. Through you, I'd like to explain to the audience what the program is all about. And basically what we aim to do, James, is to look at the lives of famous Canadians and to focus on the events and the circumstances and the people who have influenced them to achieve the successes that they've achieved. So we're going to kind of do a retrospective on your life. We obviously are going to focus a lot on your 7 years on the IndyCar circuit. But I want to begin back very early days and find out from you where you were born.
Well, I was born to Jeremy and Arlene Hinchcliffe, December 5th, 1986, in North York.
In North York.
Yeah, and we kind of spent my younger years. We grew up in Markham. My dad had just quit working for Petro-Canada at the time because they had told him that he had to move to Calgary. And when he told my mother that, who was pregnant with me at the time, she said, "Have a great trip." So he quit, and so that's how it all started.
Now, I have had the great pleasure of chatting with your father. We've never met, although we've talked several times, and he was instrumental in assisting and arranging for you to be here. And I understand that he's had quite an influence on your life.
I mean, the biggest, ignoring the obvious that he created it. Yeah. My love of motorsports comes from my dad. My dad's originally from England, and obviously in England, racing, and especially open wheel racing, is probably second only to soccer in terms of sport popularity. And so growing up, that was the influence that I had. Most Canadian kids grow up, with hockey influence. My dad had never seen a hockey game, never cared to. I didn't realize how big hockey was in Canada until I started going to school and all my friends were playing it and talking about it. I thought racing was what everybody watched.
You have siblings?
I do. I've got one of each. The oldest of us is my sister Rebecca, who actually works with me kind of on the business side of my life and all those types of things. And my brother Christopher is just back from England, where he did a stint over at Oxford University getting his PhD. Wow. So he's the accomplished one in the family.
What's his PhD in? What did he study?
The philosophy of law.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So there's one of us in this room who's interested in that.
Well, so I very cruelly make the joke. I say, Chris, you got a PhD in philosophy. Like all you can do with that is ask people why they want fries with that. I say that in jest because just to make me feel better about the fact that he has so many degrees and I have none. But
you were a fan of racing. You mentioned your father's influence, but you got involved in racing at a very young age.
Yeah, I was addicted to it from honestly as early back as I can remember. To me, a normal Sunday was wake up at 7 a.m., watch the Formula One races with Dad, do homework or yard work or chores or whatever was on Mom's list, and then watch the IndyCar race in the afternoon. And that was just normal for me. I didn't know any different. The IndyCar race in Toronto actually started in '86, the year I was born, and Dad was at that first one. And he brought me to my first one when I was 18 months old. And I guess I caught the bug because I've been to every single one since, either as a spectator or a participant. So yeah, it was definitely instilled in me at a very young age.
Then you got a gift for your 9th birthday that was fairly significant.
In retrospect, yeah. At the time, it just seemed like a way for Mama to be really mad at me a lot, but it ended up working out okay. I got a go-kart. So it goes back a little further than that. So my dad had, I guess the running joke in the family is a midlife crisis. And at 45, he bought himself a vintage British sports car. And he decided to go racing. So there's a series in Ontario that is largely comprised of expat Brits who have midlife crises and buy British vintage sports cars. And so I was 8 years old, and I thought this was the coolest thing that my dad was a race car driver. Now, like, this was, for me, just the coolest thing ever. And so we would go around to Mosport and to Shannonville and all these tracks in Ontario, and I would, I'd put gas in the tank, and I'd put air in the tires, and, I mean, this was the best. It was the greatest thing ever. And we met a gentleman, Bob Mason, running vintage cars, who had a son, Andrew, who raced go-karts. So, we got to know them pretty well. And I said, hey, you got to come check out my son's go-kart race one weekend. And I remember thinking, go-kart race? What mean go-kart race? Because at the time, I know go-karts as most people do, the concession carts that you drive at Canada's Wonderland or something like that. Nay. There's an entire world of semi-pro and professional go-kart racing.
Yeah.
So I got exposed to that, and my dad foolishly took me to one of Andrew's races, and it was kind of like me-likey. And 9th birthday came along, and I got a go-kart. The cruel part was my birthday's in December, and we lived in Canada, so I had to stare at it for like 4 months, before I was able to drive it. But
banging around into the walls of the rec room.
yeah, I mean, the garage was not big enough to do laps. I tried.
Yeah. Let's go back to the education for a minute. Where'd you do your high school?
So I went to high school at Oakville, Trafalgar. Yeah, great stint there, and very much enjoyed growing up in Oakville and going to OT.
There was a bit of a conflict between even at that stage, between education and your pursuit of racing. Tell us how you balanced that.
Well, it was a very internal conflict, because externally it was quite clear, James, you were going to school. It wasn't much of a debate when it came to the parents' side of the argument. But it's funny. So, my dad, as I said, frequented the race in Toronto, and he got the opportunity to meet one of the drivers through a sponsor connection, Brian Herda, still involved in the sport today. And he posed this question to Brian. He said, hey, when you were coming up, how did you balance, school and aspirations of driving race cars? And Brian said, well, my parents had a deal with me where I had to maintain a 70% average in school or the racing stopped. And my dad said, that's a great idea. And he looked at me and goes, but it's 80%. Hardly in a position to bargain with him, accepted those terms. And so all through school and then the rest of it, that was kind of the deal with Mom and Dad. Was
any dispensation from the teachers for the time you'd spend?
No. So at my high school, they had a program, and it was called the Extra Step or the Next Step program, something like that. And it sounds like a rehab program, but it was for student athletes. So if you were competitive in a sport and you missed a lot of school for practices or tournaments or whatever, they would give you dispensation to hand in projects early or late or write exams at times different from other kids, whatever. And by probably grade 11, I was already traveling in this professional kind of go-kart level, and was missing a fair amount of school. And so my mom and I went into the office to talk to the principal and the guidance counselor and whoever else, and to enroll me in the Extra Step program. And they kind of looked at me really funny, because in grade 11 I was still in go-karts, but I was traveling all across Canada and the U.S. and they're like, you race Go-karts. Yeah, that's not a sport. You don't.
You're not a junior A hockey player.
Exactly
it doesn't count.
And hockey, rugby, volleyball, figure skating, curling. I mean, pick it. They were cool with it.
Yeah.
Go-karts? No, that's not a real thing.
Yeah.
So I had one teacher who happened to be a motorsports fan in his own right. My chemistry teacher, Mr. Bird, love him to this day. He was the only one that cared at all and gave me any kind of leniency and things like that, and kind of had to deal with it.
Tell us about your university career. You went on to university following your high school. Went to a university dear to my heart. Tell us about your early days in university.
Well, my early days were my only days. It was a brief stint, I'll be honest. But so in racing especially, there's no school program for that. You don't get scholarships to drive race cars. So a lot of drivers don't actually ever make it to the post-secondary level if they even finished high school. Most of them don't do it in class by that age. They're doing online courses or homeschooled or whatever. But education was understandably, very important for my parents, and so I had to at least take a swing at university. Yeah. And I did. I went to McMaster in a commerce and economics program. It was funny. I actually wanted to go for journalism. I read every racing magazine that was printed on Earth every month. And I'm like, this is a cool job. Like writing about racing, just going to races and writing about, that's a cool job.
And getting paid to do it.
Getting paid to do it.
Yeah.
Expenses paid trip to every race you want to go to, getting paid to write, this is great. And so, I told my dad, I was like, hey, I want to go to school for journalism. He goes, yeah, no, that's not a real job. And I'm like, that's not fair, man. That's a lot of... And so we kind of landed on commerce and economics because I was counseled at a very young age about the kind of business side of the sport of racing. So we figured business would serve me well in my sport, and I got a year and a half into my stint at Mac and was presented with an opportunity that was really too good to pass up, and so schooling got kind of put on hold.
Now, I'm really interested in the arrangement that you made with the school, and we'll come back to that. But just tell us what the deal was with McMaster University.
So, the first deal had to be struck with mom and dad. So they had, like I said, I was given this opportunity, and it was kind of one of those once in a lifetime deals, and I don't like not giving 100% of myself to something that I'm doing. And my school was suffering because of my racing, and my racing was suffering because of my school, and my philosophy was schools have been around for a long time, and they're probably still going to be around in a couple years if racing doesn't work out. So, and I convinced my parents that I needed to really focus on this opportunity I'd been given because it was a very rare one. And so they said, okay, we'll go talk to the school. So I went to the office at Mac, and they said, no problem. Come back anytime in the next 5 years. And you just pick up where you left off. So I go home and I tell mom and dad that story, and they're like, great, you've got 5 years to make a living driving cars, or you go back to school. That was the deal.
And we'll pursue how that one worked out in a few minutes.
Right.
I want to back up a bit and get into the racing. So you started the go-karts at the age of 9. You wouldn't have had any aspirations to do that as a career at that point, I assume.
No. At 9 years old, I knew that wasn't a real job. That's not something people actually got to do. It was a hobby. A lot of kids play hockey without having aspirations of playing in the NHL. This was a way for Dad and I to go hang out on weekends, and that's all it was.
And my understanding is that in motorsports, you sort of move up by age and by power of the vehicle, I guess. Tell us just in general terms how that works.
Right, so in karting, I started at 9, which by general terms for people that want to do it professionally, I started quite late. If you're not skating by 3, you're never going to play hockey, and if you're not golfing by 5, you're never going to be Tiger Woods, et cetera, et cetera. So as I was not getting into the sport with aspirations of doing it professionally, my late arrival didn't bother me. But you start off in a go-kart that probably does about 50, 55 kilometers an hour and is regulated to a certain weight. And then as you grow, you move up classes, and the cart gets a bit heavier, but the engine gets a bit more powerful. And every year or two, you kind of move up the ranks.
And does the competition increase as you go up?
Yeah, generally what happens is you weed kids out, right? So at the, say, 5 to 10 range, there are X number of kids that really take an interest in it. But then by 10, some of them have found soccer or hockey or girls, and stop wanting to spend their weekends at racetracks. And kind of every level you move up, you sort of experienced some drop off in that sense.
Yeah. Now, at the age of 14, you became a professional.
It's a very loose use of the word, Fred, but yeah, as far as the go-karting world goes, yeah. There's a professional tour, if you will, of karting that runs all over North America, and there was a guy, a team that was based in Guelph, he owned a team, and so he comes to a lot of the local tracks, and he had seen me drive and said, hey, I think you're good enough to run this tour, would you come drive for my team? And Dad and I kind of talked about it, and we thought, well, hey, if he thinks if he thinks he sees something that he likes and he knows more about it than we do, let's go for it. So that is, kind of when my unofficially professional career, that's when my kind of approach really switched.
Mm-hmm.
I went from a kid who liked doing it on weekends with his dad to, well, hey, these kids are trying to do this professionally. And if I'm going to go against them and race against them and beat them, I'm going to have to take it as seriously as they are. And so that was the age that my focus really switched, and I really kind of dove in to trying to make it in this world.
So you really at that stage began to think maybe this is a long-term pursuit professionally, or did that come later?
That came later. I mean, even again at that age, it was still tough to wrap your head around as a kid that was something that was even remotely possible.
Now, as I understand it, at the age of about 16, you went to driving school. Is that what it's called?
Racing school. Yeah.
Tell us about that and what you got from that.
So the Bridgestone Racing Academy up at Mosport, just outside Oshawa, has had a school there. It was previously at a track called Shannonville, a little further away, and basically every Canadian driver, certainly from the Ontario, Quebec, side of the country, had gone through this school at some point to get your race license. So there is a program you have to go through to be accredited as a professional driver. And I had obviously showed an interest in going to the school and had met the owner. My dad became quite good friends with him, and it was kind of the end of my second season of the pro karting tour. And you have to be 16 to do this series, do this school. And I was like 15 3/4. So Brett Goodman, the owner of the school, he knew me, he knew my dad, he knew my record, and gave me special dispensation to participate in the last round of this race series in the race school. So I'd gone to the school earlier in the year, done my course to get my license, and then there was an actual race school that took place with their cars and everything. And so first time really driving a race car, very different obviously from a go-kart, and that transition's a big one for any driver. And I was significantly younger than any of the other people that were in that series. I was the only one whose mom had to drive him to the track. Just put it that way. And on Sunday, at the end of the weekend, I won the race. And that was against 18, 20, 22-year-old guys that have been doing this for a while, that have aspirations of driving. And that was the first time where I was kind of like, oh, all right, maybe there's something to this. Maybe we do have what it takes.
And that led to an invitation that took you overseas.
Yeah, so that led to, it's, timing's everything, right?
Yeah.
In life and business and sport, it's no different. And right at that time, BMW was launching a new single-seater, entry-level Formula car series in North America. They had a series successfully running in Germany, one in England, and one in Asia, and they wanted a North American version of the same series. And so part of the program that they would run is they would give sponsorships to 6 kids in each series, and they would become kind of BMW junior drivers.
Right.
And so what they did is they opened up a casting basically to any young karter or maybe with 1 year of car experience driver in North America. They got hundreds of applications from kids, and they picked 24 of us to go over to Valencia, Spain. There's a Formula One track over there, and they had a bunch of the Formula BMW cars there, and we were going to go through 3 days of tests and simulations and things, and they were going to pick their kids from that thing. So on a whim, someone told me about it. I hadn't even heard about it. It's not like it wasn't like an invitation showed up in the mail. Somebody said, "Oh, you should just put your name in for this." And if you get selected, it's good seat time. It's in January when everyone else is not doing anything. So at least you get a couple of days in a car, whatever. All right. Fill out a form. Got picked as one of the 24. So Dad and I packed our bags and flew to Spain. So now this is the coolest thing ever. You're 17 years old and just turned 17, and I'm in Spain. I'm driving a race car on a Formula One track. BMW's picking up the tab. It's just the coolest thing ever. And was fully expecting it to stop there and just go back to driving Formula Fords or whatever back home, and got through the 3 days and ended up getting one of the scholarships. And so I was a factory BMW junior driver for that upcoming season in 27 or when I was 17 in 2004.
I just want to stop for a minute. The route that you went through was sort of your own choosing. You were just sort of going where the opportunities came. Is that the way it is now, or is there something more formulated about how people become drivers even today, 10 or 12 years later?
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, I sometimes struggle looking at how I'm very much no longer the young guy in the sport anymore. And I feel like it was just yesterday I was in Indy Lights kind of thing. But the junior categories have changed so much from when I was there, 8 to 14 years ago kind of thing. Back when I was doing it, my dad and I did everything. My dad was my manager, and we kind of had nobody that we knew in the business to bounce ideas off of. We did not know anybody that had any experience in it, and every winter we would sit there and try and figure out where the best competition was going to be. That was always the most important thing for us when we were deciding which series to run next. Do we stay in the same series for another year? Do we move up to a different category? And it was always dependent on where the best competition was. Because once you get to the top, all the best are there. So if you can't beat them down here, you're not going to beat them up here. So there's no point. There's no point trying to find the easier championship and win it easily. And you think you're great, but you're really not great. So it was a big challenge every year to kind of make that right decision, and it was always very stressful. Did we make the right call? And nowadays, there's something called the Mazda Road to Indy. And it's very simple. There's Series 1, Series 2, Series 3, and then IndyCar.
Okay.
And the even bigger part of that is the champion from each series is given a scholarship to move up to the next series.
Okay.
So if you win the first series, you get to go up to the second one. You win the second one, you go up to the third one. You win the third one, you get a partial budget to move up into IndyCar. That doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. This is for a sport that is so hard to get into because of the cost. Like the barrier to entry of motorsports is just so high.
Yeah.
Actually being rewarded for success, though, is fairly commonsensical in every other sport. It's just not the case in most places in the world. So what we have now is very different, but a very cool structure.
So what was next for you then? What did you were 17? What did you do when you were 18? What was the next level?
Well, after the year in BMW, I finished second in the championship, and I won Rookie of the Year, and BMW offered me a drive over in Europe. At that point, that was kind of a big decision-making time for me, because you headed over to Europe, your career path now becomes Formula One. That becomes the goal. You stay here, it's obviously IndyCar. And, I had a lot of talks with my family about it, my parents about it, but at 17, this was still very much a pipe dream and a very, very long shot. They weren't ready for me to give up my education yet, move to Europe and pursue something. So the decision was made relatively easily, actually, to turn that down and stay in North America. And so we decided to move up series to something that was called the Star Mazda series, which still exists. and we took a swing at that one.
And you did well?
We did all right. Won a bunch of races, finished third in the championship, and a very competitive season. It was, it's one of those things you look back on, and it's funny. I'm going to fast forward for a second here. My second ever IndyCar race, I was walking back from the pits with Dario Franchitti after one of the sessions, and Dario Franchitti's living legend, good friend of mine, and helped me out a lot when I was in Indy Lights, whatever. I was in my second race. I was still very intimidated by the whole scenario and whatever. And Dario puts his arm around me and he goes, "Hinchy, my boy, I'll tell you something." He goes, "You spent all your life dreaming of being here and working your butt off to get here, and then you get here and realize you're driving against the same jerks you have been since you were 10. And it really stuck with me. And once he said that, everything kind of became okay again. I felt like I was part of it again, And the reason I bring that up is because in 2005, I ran Pro Mazda, and 4 of the top 5 guys in the championship became IndyCar drivers.
Wow.
And so it was kind of funny, to look back on it. So that was a really fun year. Actually, we had a lot of fun with that.
Coming out of that was a fully sponsored, paid ride. Tell us about that. And by the way, you're still at Mac while all this is going on.
Yeah. Still doing Calculus 101 at 8:30 in the morning on Fridays, walking 25 minutes through 4 feet of snow to get there. I missed a lot of those classes, guys. I'm not gonna lie to you. It had nothing to do with racing. I just didn't want to be in calculus at 8:30 on a Friday. Trying to balance that was a huge hassle. And as I said before, my school was being affected because of the racing. I don't think I was as focused on my racing as I should have been. But an opportunity came up to move up to what was then called the Atlantic Series, which is sort of the equivalent of Indy Lights, which is one below. It's OHL to NHL as a hockey reference. And it was, it's a funny story. So in the history of motor racing and sponsorship, which as we've kind of loosely talked about is so critical in racing, the one thing that's never ever happened is a sponsor calling you saying, "Hey, I want to give you some money." It takes years and hours it's years of trying and hours in front of computers, building PowerPoint presentations and sitting in front of boards and, trying to sell yourself and show how this is ROI. This is for you. This isn't for me. This is for you.
Yeah.
And it's the toughest part of the job. It really is. And I get this cold call one day from a guy who I want to say the story was his parents lived next door to one of my former teachers at OT. And I had been featured in the local newspaper, the Oakville Beaver, and true story. I didn't make that up. And it was sitting on the coffee table or something, and this guy, his name's Adam, had been young kind of tech guy, started a company, found some money, big race fan. So he saw this article about a local guy that his mom's neighbor had taught in school and whatever. So he goes, I want to get involved in racing. So he somehow got my contact information and got in touch with me. Never happened. So I get on the phone with this guy and I start, talking to him about it and what it costs. And, this is normally the part, maybe you might talk to a company that says, "Oh yeah, we want to help you out," and they give you about enough money to buy 1.5 tires. That's the kind of level they're thinking, And so we got to the point where it became numbers, and I said what it cost to sponsor a car for a season. Didn't flinch. I was like, "Well,
can we ask you what that number is?"
So I think I told him about $250,000, so $250,000, and didn't bat an eyelid. I was like, "All right." He didn't hang up on me, so we might be onto something here. And stayed in touch, kind of did a small deal for the end of that season in Pro Mazda, and that grew into a much larger deal at this level up, the Atlantic Series. And like I said, that is the opening act of the IndyCar races. Mm-hmm. It was with a team that was associated with an IndyCar team, one that had a history of promoting young Canadian talent. All my heroes drove there, Jacques Villeneuve, Greg Moore, Paul Tracy, this was where they went. Yeah. And I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. This is fully paid ride with Forsyth Racing, Atlantic Championship. This is the opportunity of a lifetime.
Now that that led to a couple of years where you had a first year of hit and miss, a second year where you're in the top 5. And then 2008 came, and everybody in this room will know that that was the year of the recession. What did that do to the auto industry?
Well, I mean, it crippled a lot of industries, the auto industry being one of them, but in a time where companies were desperately all trying to save money, the first thing that gets cut is frivolous expenditures like a motorsports program. Yeah. So all of a sudden, something that was already hard to come by, sponsorship dollars, was nearly impossible. At the time, there were 2 different open wheel series running in North America, which is entirely different. We'd take 90 minutes up just on that, but we won't. They ended up, for the better, but they ended up coming together because they couldn't survive on their own anymore. Lots of drivers lost rides, lots of teams went out of business. It was a very tough time to go racing. And it was a very critical time in my career because I was kind of just on the cusp, and it definitely put us back a little bit, but we begged, borrowed, and stole anything and everything we could, and we were able to keep me in a car. 2008 was kind of the lost year. I mean, we ran the Atlantic Series again, but there wasn't really any competition. We weren't really associated with another series. It really was kind of a lost year as far as my career went, and with the amalgamation of the 2 top-level open-wheel series, it became obvious that Indy Lights was now the place to be for a driver trying to make his mark. So that became the goal.
And that's where you went then. I'm just thinking about the dollars. You mentioned the $250 at the earlier level. What's the cost of being an Indy Light per year then?
We go from $250,000 to about $750,000. Okay. And so that's without crashing anything. Yeah. Because you got to pay for that when you do that.
Now, let's talk about the sponsorship thing for a minute. So the sponsor picks up the bill. What do they get both that year and in terms of futures?
Oh boy, you're going to make me lose a bunch of sponsors here. No, I'm kidding. No, so the sad truth of the junior levels of motorsport is there is not a whole lot of return for a company to sponsor a driver, have their sticker on the car, and all the rest of it. A lot of those series are not televised. If they are, they're tape delayed, shortened programs on some obscure channel. So it becomes very tough to sell a corporate because now you're not asking for $1,500 from the local body shop. Yeah. You're asking for $750,000. Yeah. It's a not insignificant amount of money. So what a lot of drivers end up doing is getting pretty creative on fundraising techniques, and we've seen everything from selling a percentage of future earnings to there was actually a driver that floated himself on the stock market. And so it literally breeds a lot of creativity and trying to raise those funds. And that was kind of a program I got into. We got to the point where we had to start essentially selling off chunks of my future. So it's a risk. It's a risk for potential investors, but that was really the only way to get the money because the return for an actual company wasn't really there. Yeah.
So by 2010, you have a very successful year. You finished second in the Indy Light. You got a phone call. Tell us about the phone call.
So I got the phone call that every kid wants to get, and as you said, we had a good year in lights that year, and an IndyCar team, Newman Haas, very very famous, very successful IndyCar team, gave me a call and said, "Hey, look, we've been watching you all year. We've liked what you've done. We want to do a 2-car team next year. We have
at the IndyCar level.
At the IndyCar level, yeah. This is for a promotion,
big time.
And we've got one driver signed. He's a 10-year veteran, and we want a rookie to put beside him and to help train, so the veteran can train him and just whatever. And we want to test you. You're up for the job." So this was it. That was a phone call that you spend the previous 12 years trying to get.
But even at that, you weren't offered the job. You still
No.
had to try out.
It was a job interview.
Yeah.
So it was a test. So we call it testing. And there's a little track down in Sebring, Florida, really in the middle of nowhere, kind of central Florida, and very popular place to go testing in the winter. And they brought a car down, and we did 2 days of testing with me and this other driver. Excuse me. And at the end of day 2, I was actually a fraction of a second quicker than the other driver. So
And the 10-year veteran.
the 10-year veteran. So it was my first time in the car, and that was cool. I mean, I think for about 8 years. No, it's only been for 6 years after that. My dad's phone background was the picture of me pulling out of the pits for the first time in an IndyCar. It was just the coolest moment for us. We were the guys that sat in the grandstands every year cheering on Paul Tracy and Michael Andretti and everything at the Toronto Indy, and now here we were doing this.
So at that point, you think your career is made. It's just going to be straight uphill all the way.
I'm not going to lie to you. A lot of ignorance comes with youth, and as I'd already experienced, racing is an emotional roller coaster. It's the highest of highs. It's the lowest of lows. It is this. It is a constant roller coaster. And I'd already been through that in my junior career, up and down, up and down, up and down. And I get this opportunity. I prepare as best I can. I go there. I do the job. And yeah, you get out of the car, and it's like your mic drop moment. You're like, all right, done deal. I'm an IndyCar driver now. Yeah. And so the team calls me up. They're like, James, impressive performance. We'd love to sign you. One problem, we don't have any sponsors for your car. And I was like, okay, well, two things. One, you're Newman Haas. You're a 7-time championship winning team. You guys have name recognition. You've been in the sport for decades. I'm sure you'll find money. 2, I don't have another option. So no one else was knocking my door down. So I signed a deal. With Newman Haas. And again, you're up here. Yeah, you're nice and quick. We want to sign you, but we don't have any money. And okay, so all right. So now we're on the way back up, trying to find the money. And we were given a date. There was a specific date that was the drop dead date by which we had to have a check in the bank from a sponsor to have the car prepped on a truck and on the road heading down to St. Petersburg, Florida for the first race of the season. And the team had commercial people, and Dad and I were using old contacts we had, and we were trying absolutely everything we could. And I had this belief that it was just going to happen. It's going to happen. It's got to happen, And that day came, and that day went. And I was faced with the realization that despite everything that I had trained for, fought for, sacrificed for to get that opportunity, go there, execute on that day, without the sponsorship, it means nothing.
So you spent the first race
on pit wall watching everybody else drive around. And that was very tough. I was with the team. I was technically a member of the team. I signed a deal, but just didn't have a car. I was the carless driver. It's like the boatless fisherman, not very useful. And I went down to St. Pete and wore my team shirt and stood on the timing stand and watched my teammate race and watch everyone else race. And I had this moment, standing on pit wall, watching everybody else drive around, where, I almost accepted my fate. I thought, hey, look, I worked so hard all these years. I did everything I could to fight to stay in the car when things got tough. I drove well enough to get this opportunity. I got this opportunity and performed at the test, and it still didn't happen. It's not meant to be. And furthermore, that March was the 4 years and 7 months into my 5-year deferral from Mac.
Yeah.
So
you had to be back in
come
school by
September, I was back to commerce and economics.
Yeah.
And so I figured, you know what? I'll spend the summer traveling with the team and going to the races and hanging out. It's been a good run. I've got to do some really cool things. I've got to go to some really cool places, drive some really cool cars, experience a ton of things that most 23, 4-year-old kids at that point hadn't done. But at some point, you got to know when to pull the cord and go get a real job. And I kind of reached that point. It was really sad. more because, mom and dad were going to be right, and I was going to have to go back to school. But then it was the Saturday night of the race weekend. So, the race was the next day, and we got a phone call from one of the companies we've been talking to that were like, okay, we're in. How soon can we get a car on track?
Wow.
And so 2 weeks later, I made my IndyCar debut in the second round of the championship.
Wow. Exciting stuff. Now, how did you do in that race?
I crashed. Let me take that back. I was hit.
Yeah.
Okay, I DNF'd, but I qualified well. That was the important part.
That was then the first year. That would be the 2011 season.
Yes.
And it finished on a high note. We could talk for 3 or 4 hours. I mean, your career has been fascinating, but what I'd like to do is look at each year and sort of just hit the highlights, because there's more of this stuff going on, isn't there? So in the first year, you end up having to get a sponsor for the second half of the season.
Yeah. The company, Sprott Asset Management, Canadian company. Eric Sprott's the owner, and he was the guy that called us on Saturday at St. Pete to say, let's get a car on the track for the next race. And the original deal was to get us through the race in Toronto in July, but that was only about 2/3 of the way through the season. So we spent the first 2/3 of the season talking to still other companies, and now that we had a car on track, we at least had something tangible to sell, right? Before you were selling a dream, now we had something. And we didn't do it. I'm not gonna lie to you, we didn't get it done. So I was very fortunate that the team owners saw that we were in the running for Rookie of the Year. I'd already had a couple top fives at that point, and they didn't want to see it end yet. So they actually backed the car for the remainder of the season. And kept me on track, and it all came good, because in the last race of the season we ended up taking the Rookie of the Year championship, which was something that we were pretty proud of, because Rookie of the Year is the one thing you only get one shot at.
Yeah, exactly.
Indy 500 happens every year, the championships every year, but Rookie of the Year you only get one crack at.
Well, congratulations,
Thank you.
That's a pinnacle. Year 2, 2012. Just give us some highlights of that year, if you will.
Well, the fact that 2012 happened was a highlight, because carrying on with this theme, at the end of this season in 2011, where you do well and win Rookie of the Year and all the rest of the team's like, hey, great job, we love you. We'd love to sign you to a multi-year deal. One problem, we're closing the shop and we're going out of business. Yeah. So instead of a contract, I got a pink slip, and I was backed out of a job. And I was thrown a lifeline by Michael Andretti. Danica Patrick was leaving IndyCar and heading to NASCAR, and they needed somebody to drive the bright green GoDaddy car. And so the fact that even happened was probably the biggest highlight. Qualified on the front row for the Indy 500 that year. That was incredible. Got my first podium at Long Beach. That was obviously a big deal. There's a bunch of little moments throughout the season, but just landing the deal with Michael and GoDaddy.
Yeah, that has to be one of the most coveted spots in the whole sport.
It was. I mean, it was the most recognizable for sure. I mean, a lot of people have heard of Danica Patrick. Less people have heard of Will Power or Scott Dixon or Ryan Hunter-Reay. Danica was a very, very prominent figure in our sport, and stepping into that car as she transitioned over to stock car racing, those were some pretty big heels to fill. And they had done a lot. GoDaddy had done a lot on the promotion side with Danica and the commercials and all the rest of it. Some very, controversial Super Bowl ads and things like that. So it was a big position to fill, but we had a lot of fun with it.
Tell us about your first race, because there was a lot of emotion the first race of the 2012 season with.
There was, yeah. So 2011 actually ended on quite a sour note. We lost a driver and a very good friend in the final race of the season in Las Vegas, and that's a hard thing to deal with. I had, I think, very naively, again going back to youth, thought that racing had got to a point where it was very, very safe, and and it is, don't get me wrong, we've made incredible, progress in that area over the last 20 years, but it's never going to be fully safe. And I didn't really appreciate that until we lost Dan, because I kind of thought I'd be...
This is Dan Weldon.
Dan Weldon, yeah. Sorry. I kind of thought I'd go through my whole career and never lose a friend. I just assumed that we were at that point.
Yeah.
That I was coming in late enough that was a thing. But very much not the case. And we lost Dan. And Dan had actually, the morning of that race, signed a contract with Michael Andretti to drive the GoDaddy car the next year.
Wow.
So when I was penned as a potential replacement, I mean, Dan was a series champion, a two-time Indy 500 winner, one of the most likable guys in the paddock in the world, and I did not feel at all worthy for that that position. It ended up obviously going that way, and the first race was very emotional because of that, because I always looked at that car as Dan's car. I drove the 27 for 3 years, and every single time I strapped in, I thought of it as Dan's car. I had Dan's logo on my helmet for every single race that I've done since that race in Vegas.
Dan's family was at the first race.
And Dan lived in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Yeah, which is where the
and
race
so
was.
his family was there, and that's where the first race was. And his sister had been over from England. And, it meant a lot to me to kind of have them in my corner. I'd spoken to them before I took the ride, and, wanted to make sure that they were okay with it and everything. And it was very cool. It was very special to kind of have the first race be in Dan's backyard.
And you finished on the fourth?
Fourth, yeah. Started fourth, finished fourth.
That was a strong season. You had the second starting position at the Indy 500.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found interesting about that season was the way your profile, you were Rookie of the Year in 2011. 2012, you won another significant award in the industry.
What was that?
That was fan favorite.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes. I did. That's
How
true.
did you forget?
I forgot about that. Because it's, I don't know. I don't feel like I earned that one. No, yeah, you're right. That was huge because, obviously it was only my second year in the sport, but I honestly credit GoDaddy with that, really, because they were one of the best sponsors at activating with their driver, and they featured Danica and myself in a couple commercials that were pretty funny and goofy, and I think that helped people kind of see who I was and what I was like, and I think that kind of helped me with that very prestigious award.
Yeah. One of the things, and I do want to sort of move through the years quickly, but one of the things about that season that was a down, and it was otherwise an up season, had to do with the loss of your race engineer. Can you take a minute and tell us how important your chief engineer is to the team and to you?
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough one to explain briefly, but if you kind of, again, trying to use a sports reference, it's sort of the relationship between a football coach and the quarterback. There's obviously a lot of other people involved in making a team win, and it's the same in racing. But that level of communication, that level of trust between a driver and an engineer is paramount. I've got to be able to relay what the car's doing to this one person. This one person has to be able to make decisions on setup that's going to make the car better. And that relationship, that working relationship, is vital. It's the most important relationship between two people on the whole team.
And your safety is very much in the hands of that person.
And that person and every person that puts their hands on the car, that bolts it together, puts the tires on. I mean, people sometimes think of racing as an individual sport because it's one driver in the car, but it's the epitome of a team sport because my life is in the hands of the people that are building this thing. I got to trust them.
How many people on the team today, just to give our friends a
So
indication?
we have a two-car team at Schmidt-Peterson Motorsport, and we travel with about 40 to 45 people. So about 20 guys per car.
Big team.
Just to get the thing on the racetrack.
Let's move to year 3, 2013. Good year. You won 3. Probably your best year, would you say?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again,
6 top 5s.
a lot of ups and downs, but high highs, low lows. The first win, obviously, the most important one there. and back at St. Pete. So, again, in Dan's backyard with his car or street named after him at that race. It was, and his family was there. So that was very special. And there's this saying in racing that the first one's the hardest, and the rest start coming easier after that. And we won 2 more races that year. So it was, and we're on the podium a few other times. So a very successful year in that sense.
Tell me about your parents' reaction to the first win, because they were there at St. Pete's. Tell me how they responded.
I mean, it was one of the coolest moments, because we all it takes a village to raise a kid, and it takes a village to get a driver to that level, and my parents were obviously the 2 most critical people in that whole thing, and to be standing there in victory lane with them at that level was just amazing, because it was almost like a validation. Everything that we had done, all the sacrifices that we had made, the money we'd spent, the money we'd stolen. Sorry. It was all worth it. We proved that we belonged there. And that's a very special moment for a group of people to be able to experience together.
Yeah. Your second victory was in Brazil. Really an unusual race.
It was an unusual finish.
Yeah.
Because I was on top.
How much of the race did you lead for?
About, how long's this stage? Maybe about twice this stage. Yeah, it was a bizarre race. That's what I love about IndyCar racing is it's really not over till it's over. And this was case in point. We kind of had a problem earlier in the race, ended up cycling to the front with some pit strategy, and I think we had a restart with 10 laps to go or something. I think we restarted 4th or 5th and kind of picked guys off one at a time, and ended up in second place with I think 2 laps to go, and tried to pass the guy for first with 2 laps to go, and he basically tried to stuff me in the wall, and I thought, well, that wasn't very nice. That was an unkind maneuver.
What number was that?
But I remember this maneuver. And so heading into the last lap, and the best passing opportunity is the last corner. You come down this very long straightaway into a hairpin, big brake zone, best place to pass. And so I decided I was not going to try the same move twice, because fool me once. So I was going to try and fool him, and pulled a classic, what is called an over-under maneuver on him, and pass him on the last corner of the last lap for the win.
Wow.
So, you as a kid, as a fan of racing, I grew up watching those like highlight reel moments like that. And so to be part of something like that and to come out on top of it, I've also been part of highlight reel moments where I wasn't the guy across the line first. Less fun.
Yeah. Under similar circumstances, we'll come to that.
Yeah. But it was very cool.
Yeah. Iowa was the 3rd win, and I've heard you describe that as sort of the perfect race.
It's weird. Again, as a fan, you grow up and you watch these races, and you occasionally see a Sunday where there's this guy that's just kind of in his own world. Like everyone else is really racing for second.
Yeah.
And you dream about that happening, and it happens so rarely, especially at a level as competitive as this. And we just had one of those days. My engineer nailed the setup. The car was just an absolute dream to drive, especially on a track like that. It's so important. And I think it was a 300-lap race, and it was a 250-lap race, and we led 228 laps or something.
Wow. Yeah.
It was only just during pit sequence that we weren't leading. And so it was, I remember sitting in the press conference afterwards and being like, so this is how Scott Dixon feels most of the time. It's just, it must be great for you, because this was awesome, But no, so again, all 3 wins that season were very different, but all very special.
We'll move to year 4, 2014. A lot of changes in the whole team that year.
A lot of changes. GoDaddy decided to get out of racing, so they were up with their contract, so they left IndyCar. Had a new sponsor come in. That's a big change. As a team, Andretti Autosport was switching manufacturers from Chevrolet to Honda. That was a big change, technically. My engineer changed again, so that relationship, that important relationship, is kind of reset, starts back at 0. So yeah, a lot of hurdles to overcome in 2014.
But it was fairly successful. You had some podiums.
Had some great races. Had some woulda, coulda, shoulda races that we frankly should have won were it not for a yellow flag falling at the wrong time sort of thing.
Yeah.
So still a very competitive year, yeah.
So you were rewarded for that success by being released by Andretti.
Yeah, again, James, you're doing a great job, but your sponsor's gone again, so you're out. Nature of the beast, you know.
Wow.
It's just you're never really secure in this business. You always kind of have to have one eye looking over your shoulder. But
And that's when you moved to Schmidt-Peterson?
exactly right. So at the time, Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports was looking for a driver. I was looking for a job. It all kind of made sense. I'd actually driven for Sam Schmidt in Indy Lights my first year in 2009, and so he's the Schmidt of Schmidt-Peterson. The Peterson is Rick Peterson, who's actually a Canadian businessman from Calgary, and so that connection was pretty cool. I already knew and had raced for Sam. Rick's the only Canadian team owner.
Yeah.
It made a lot of sense in a lot of ways. So it was once the opportunity came up, it was a really easy deal to get done.
So you begin the year with a new car, new sponsor, new car body, new team, and in your first race you do relatively well, as 10th place or something?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the first one. Something like that.
Something like that.
It was reasonable.
Your second race was in New
Better.
Orleans,
Yeah, that one was better.
and it started out as a disaster. Though. It was raining.
Yeah.
There were drainage issues on the
Yeah.
track.
It was
yet you won
terrible.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was terrible. It was a new circuit, first time we'd run there, and yeah, I mean you build a racetrack in a swamp, it's probably going to get wet.
How's that happen?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know who missed the memo on that one.
Yeah.
And so it rained, and there's nowhere for water to go when you're already underwater, and yeah, the race was a disaster. It was it was just yellow flags and cars getting stuck in the mud and all the rest of it. And my strategist rolled the dice on a pit call, and we found ourselves leading, and we just kind of held on to it. We were by no means the quickest car, the least deserving win of my career by a landslide, but a win's a win.
You'll take it.
I've been robbed of races that I deserved, so I'll take the ones that I didn't.
Yeah. And that leads us to the Indy 500 in 2015. Tell us about that.
Well, for the Indy 500 itself, I was laid up in a hospital bed because practicing for the Indy 500, I was driving around normal day for me, going 400 kilometers an hour around a racetrack, but you know what I mean? And a part of the car broke. We had a mechanical failure on the car, and it fired me into the wall at about 350 kilometers an hour. Didn't tickle. And when I hit, you know if you have an egg and you hold it end to end, it's pretty strong, right? But you squeeze it this way and it breaks. So apparently pieces of metal can do this too. And this is a piece of the suspension that normally when it hits something just folds. It's a piece of steel, it just folds. It didn't. I hit it that perfect angle where instead of breaking, it just shot through the car like a bullet. And it went right through my body.
Ooh.
So it went in me here and it came out of me here, but it was stuck in it was still, it was this long. So I was essentially shish kebabbed, for lack of a better term.
Wow.
And very, very unusual injury. That kind of thing is, I've never heard of it before.
Yeah.
When it hit me, it hit my femoral artery in my left leg, and so I was bleeding to death quite quickly. And due to a tremendous series of events from the safety team that showed up at my car, seconds after it stopped rolling, to the medical workers at the track, to the surgeon that jumped in the ambulance on the fly, to everyone at IU Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis, in the emergency room and the operating room. My surgeon tells the story that in the elevator from the ER up to the OR, he lost my pulse and reckons I had about 90 to 120 seconds left to live had he not got me up and open and found the problem. So Indy was pretty dull for me. I was just kind of watching heavily medicated from a hospital bed.
Tell me what your reaction was when you gained consciousness. Did you think that was the end of your career?
No, foolishly, but no. We're wired wrong. We don't think like that.
Yeah.
And I woke up, as far as I was concerned, I was driving my car happily, and in blink of an eye, I'm staring at 6 giant lights. There's 10 people in the room. I've got a tube down my throat. I'm in a neck brace. And, you start asking some questions. I obviously suffered pretty big head trauma, big concussion, and was sort of loopy, heavily medicated. And started asking some questions. I couldn't talk, so they gave me a pen and a piece of paper, which I couldn't see. So I'm kind of sitting there writing like this. And the first question was, what happened? The second question was, how's my family? And the third question was, when can I get back in a car? And the doctors just sat there shaking their head like, you realize that a car is why you're here. Like, that's what did this to you. And I'm like, yes, cool story. When can I get back into a car?
Yeah.
So it's just the mindset of a driver. They said, they explained what happened, which it took a couple days for it to really set in, because like I said, that type of injury is it's unheard of. And so, especially in the state I was in, I really struggled to wrap my head around what had actually happened. But I got to the point in the story where they said, you're going to be okay, and I really didn't care about the rest.
Yeah.
They said that I wouldn't walk for about 2 weeks, that I would be in hospital for about a month, and that I wouldn't drive for 6 or 7 months. But I walked on day 4, I got out of hospital on day 10, and I drove a car 4 months later. So it sidelined me for the rest of the season, but I got back as soon as I physically could.
Wow. I want to just jump ahead a year, because I think there are a lot of elements of your story, James, that are absolutely fascinating and almost hard to believe, but one that really strikes me is what happened the next year at the Indy 500.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those storybook things,
It is. It really is.
And it's funny. So we go back to Indy a year later. This is a very hot topic of conversation, kind of going back to the scene of the crime, so to speak.
Yeah.
But everybody else was making a bigger deal of it than I was, because since that accident, I had been not only back in a car, I had been back at Indy at a test. I had been back in races. So I'd been back on an oval. I'd already crashed on an oval again at a test in Phoenix
Get
earlier
that
in the
out
year.
of the way.
Yeah, exactly. Just, yeah, that's another story. Anyway, and so, for me, it was business as usual. I had worked really hard to kind of put that behind me and just focus on getting back in the car and getting back racing. And so for me, it was just heading into the Speedway for another month of May. But obviously, this was going to be a topic of conversation. And I had told a couple people, close to me, that my whole goal for the month of May that year was to leave with a different story to tell.
Yeah.
Because that was the story everybody was telling, and I wanted a different story to tell. And we go out there and we go through the week of practice and all the rest of it. Well, we had the Grand Prix first, and we finished on the podium, so that was quite cool. And then go through the week of practice, and things are looking reasonable. And then we go into qualifying weekend. And qualifying for Indy is very unique and is very special. It means a lot to the mechanics and the engineers. It's who can.
It's almost like a race of its own, isn't it?
It really is. It pays points and it pays prize money. It really, there's as much effort goes into those 4 laps of qualifying almost as the 200 laps of the race.
Yeah.
And as a driver, it's one of the scariest things that we do, because you go to Indy, it's the fastest speeds that you're going to be going all month. You have less downforce on the car, so the car's sliding around. It's more on edge than it's ever going to be. And you're going for broke. It's how brave are you willing to be with the setup on the car and with the driving of the car.
And add to that you have crashed on that course.
Oh yeah, so a year ago I almost
earlier.
died in turn 3. So there's an added element there for sure. And it happens over 2 days. And on the first day we ended up the fastest qualifier, which was crazy. I mean, it's there's so many good teams, so many good drivers. We thought we had a decent shot at being in the top 9. That's kind of the goal. The first 3 rows, and we qualified provisionally first. So the following day they let 10th through 33rd do their qualifying, and then they do a shootout for the top 9, starting with the 9th place car from the day before and ending with the fastest car.
Exciting format.
So we had to go last.
Yeah.
And you have the option to practice earlier in the day if you want, and we chose not to do it. So at about 5:30, I strap in the car for the first time. 8 cars have gone, and it's our turn. And I don't know.
So at that point, you know what you have to beat.
Right.
To qualify first.
Right. And what's so cool about Indy qualifying is it's the average of 4 laps. So we don't do that anywhere else. Indy's the only place you do that. And so it's not just holding on for 1 lap, you've got to do it 4 times. So you survive the first lap, you're like, sweet, 1/4 of the way through. And every lap, the tires get more worn, the car gets harder to drive. And Joseph Newgarden had gone right before me, and he set a very, very good time. And it was, so his average was a 2:30.7 something. But his first lap had been a 2:31.5, and then you see drop off over the 4 laps, that's normal. But that first, a 2:31, no one had done a 2:31. And so I go out first lap, and it was a 2:30.8. So I'm like, all right, reasonable run, but we're clearly not going for pole here. And I go around, and my second lap was a 2:30.9. I'm like, well, that's weird. Normally, you go slower on the second lap.
Yeah.
And then my third lap was a 2:30.8. And so, so you're going 380 kilometers an hour plus. You're on the absolute limit of everything. And I'm trying to do like multiplication, addition, and subtraction, division in my head. And I'm trying to think, wait, what do I need to do on that last lap to be the 230 points?
Yeah.
And so I do everything I can in the car and across the line, and I see the number come up, and in my head I'm trying to do the math, and just the radio keys up, and I just hear noise, and I knew that we got it, and I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
It was just a super consistent run, and it was just so happy for the guys, because what happened in 2015 didn't just happen to me, right? We're a family.
Yeah.
And the crew and my guys, they lost a member of their family for a couple, for a bunch of races, and a guy got hurt, and that they all take that very personally. And we came back from that together, and to accomplish what we did at Indy that year together was incredibly special.
And you did well the next day. You finish.
Yeah, I think we finished 6th or 7th.
I think 6th. Yeah.
Led a bunch of the race early on. It ended up becoming a bit of a fuel strategy race, and the guy that won did it on fumes from the back of the grid. Kind of, he had a problem earlier in the race, and that's what's cool about Indy too. It's just like any other race. It can really go any way, and you don't know who's going to win it until the last lap. And but just being able to run up front and lead laps and battle with guys like Hunter Ray and Elio, guys that have won this race, it was a very special day.
It's interesting. We could talk about each race, and each race is a story unto itself. But I do want to talk about your second place finish in Texas that year.
Mm-hmm. Do you?
Yeah. I think having talked about how you won Brazil, I think we should talk about second to Texas.
So Texas, well, it was a really bizarre situation. Texas is an oval. It's a 1.5 mile oval, and you can't race in the rain on ovals. We do it on road and street tracks, but not on ovals. So the race in Texas happens the second week in June. We went there. There had been some weather. I think we started the race late. Long story short, we got the race going. We got 70-something laps in. We had gotten up to the lead. I think we qualified somewhere in the top 10. Had driven our way up to the front, leading the race. It started to rain. And so normally what happens is we'll try and sit the rain out, finish the race later that day or that night. If that's not an option, we'll come back the next day and try and run it on a Monday or something like that. So the rain looked too bad, so they paused the race. They red flagged the race and brought us in, and it didn't look like it was getting any better. So they're like, let's go home. We'll try and come back tomorrow. We went back the next day, and it didn't get any better. And the next 2 days looked even worse, and we had to get to a race the next weekend.
Right.
So for the first time in history of IndyCar, we had to leave the track in the middle of a race, essentially, because the race wasn't finished. The way the rules are written, if you get to half distance, you can call the race official. But we weren't there. We were 77 of 260 something laps in. So we had to reschedule the race. So we do a bunch of races, and a month and a half later, almost 2 months later, I think, we go back to Texas under very bizarre circumstances. We get 5 minutes of practice. Can't touch. They had photographs of all the cars. You had to come back in the exact same aerodynamic configuration that you would run. You basically had to come back with your exact same Texas car. Yeah. They restarted us exactly as we were running on lap 77, and off you go. So we started the race from the front, and off we went. And that race was going just like Iowa. We were untouchable. The car was just divine. It was so nice. And then there was a caution flag with like 50 laps to go, and there's a saying in racing, cautions breed cautions. And what was making our car so good is we were really good over a stint, over a long run.
Yeah.
We were just able to pull away from guys. First 10 laps, we'd all stay kind of close, and then bit by bit, we'd pull away. So there was a caution, close everybody back up. You're like, all right, 50 laps, we should be good. Get going again, guys get racy again, 20 laps to go, another caution. Okay, fine. Get back to go again, leading, another caution. So now we're going green with 10 laps to go. Everybody's got fresh tires, and it becomes this 3-car shootout between myself, Graham Rahal, and Tony Kanaan. And it's one of the most exciting, like, 4 minutes of racing action that you can see anywhere. It was so much fun. It was so much fun from behind the wheel. It's terrifying to look back and from the outside watch what we were doing at the speeds that we were doing it. And God bless him, he outfoxed us, and Graham won the race by 7 1,000ths of a second. Yeah. So he got me, he got me by a couple inches, which was tough. Just after the day that we'd had and the amount of laps that we led and everything, it was a tough one to give up. But that's racing.
Yeah. Giveth and taketh. Yeah. Talk about last year, 2017 season. You started strong, didn't finish quite as strongly. You were quoted in the Star as saying the season started with a bang and ended with a whimper. That's a cute comment. 13th place overall. But I took it from what I read about that your team has come out of the 2017 season optimistic about next year.
Yeah, it's certainly highly motivated. We don't show up 17 weekends a year to leave with a 13th place trophy, because there isn't one.
Yeah.
You don't get anything for being the 12th runner-up. And we're a competitive group. So for sure, I mean, the season started off strong, as you said, and had some good results, and some great cars and well-called races and all the rest of it. And we got taken out of the Indy 500. We were coming near the end of the race. I think we were running in the top 10. A crash happened in front of us, and I slowed down well enough, but the guy behind me didn't. Drilled me, and that was our day. And that just seemed to be the moment that it all kind of started going south. And we didn't have many good days after that, if I'm totally honest. The highlight, obviously, being here in Toronto, getting the podium there. But the good days are few and far between, and it's tough to pinpoint exactly why. Some of it was just sheer bad luck. Some of it was definitely on us in terms of what we were doing with the car and all the rest of it. But in 2018, we've got a new body kit coming. It kind of resets the field a little bit from an engineering point of view, and anytime that happens, every team and every driver thinks they're going to be the one that figures it out first, but they're wrong. We are.
Yeah.
So despite subpar performance last year, we're very excited about next year.
Now, we have very little time left, and I have a lot of questions for you. So what I'd like to do is just sort of blitz through these, if you're comfortable doing that. So I want to talk about, the show's called The Day in the Life. Mm-hmm. How do you prepare for racing day before the day of? Just quickly, what kinds of things do you go through to get ready for a big race the week before, say?
Right. So there is no normal day for a driver, but your days roughly consist of a lot of physical training. Driving Indy cars is a lot more physically demanding than people appreciate a lot of the time, and so physical training is a big part of our days away from the track.
Right.
Heading into a race weekend, you'll spend a lot of time at the race shop, briefing with your engineers, designing a test plan for the practice sessions and the qualifying sessions, things like that. So there's quite a bit of homework in a sense that goes into it. I get 60, 70, 80-page reports before each race and have a lot of homework to do after each race, things like that. So a lot of time in the shop and a lot of time in the gym.
In preparation for a race, is there a strategy? Do you go in with an intentional strategy as to how you're going to approach the race?
Yeah, different circuits require kind of a different approach. You talk of a strategy from just a setup strategy and how you're going to attack, setting up the car, all the way to the strategy of how you're going to execute on race day.
Right.
And all of them they're all very situational. They're all very circumstantial to what's happening that weekend. But as is usually the case in life, you'll make a plan, and by turn one, lap one, that plan will go out the window. And what breeds success in motorsports is the team and driver that are able to adapt the best and think on the fly.
Yeah. Let's talk about the day of the race. First of all, I want to just ask you about nerves. 300,000 people come to the stadium at Indianapolis. It's the biggest sports stadium in the world. How do you feel when you know you're on stage in front of 300,000 people?
Just great. Just peachy. It's tough. So one of the coolest / most terrifying things that we do is driver introductions at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Okay.
Because we spend all month there practicing, and with the exception of qualifying days and carb day, the stands are empty.
Yeah.
You'll have some people in the stands, 50, 75,000 those other days, but all of a sudden you've got 350,000 people on the property. And that's when it really hits you that, like, oh, this is kind of a big deal. What's great for us is that unlike baseball, hockey, football, basketball, once we have to do what we're doing, I can't hear them, I don't see them.
Yeah.
So that, 10 minutes of driver introductions and before the race, that's the most terrifying bit, because that's when you can see them and hear them, and you really appreciate what's going on.
During the race, concentration obviously is critical, because it's thousands of seconds of reaction, and how do you keep yourself in that zone for 2.5 hours or whatever it is?
It's one of the toughest parts. At 200 miles an hour, you cover a football field a second. So if you miss a turning point by 1/10 of a second, you're missing it by yards, and you have a window of grip of about 3 feet. So to keep that kind of concentration for that amount of time is a huge challenge. And I worked with a mental coach for years and years in my junior years to work on that. One of the big things you see is a lot of young drivers that are exceptionally fast drivers, and they do very well in the junior categories, where the longest race is maybe 45 minutes. And all of a sudden they're thrust into a series where a normal race is 1 hour and 45. The long races are 3.5, 4 hours. And they just can't do it. They don't have that ability. They end up crashing halfway through or whatever. So we do a lot of mental exercises to try and work on that.
This may be a silly question, but how many shifts per lap?
30 to 40 shifts a lap, and for anywhere from 75 to 100 laps.
Yeah.
So it's busy. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you we're doing this on an H pattern. We got flappy paddles. It's like a video game. It's not that bad, but it's, you still have to do it. You still have to tell your mind to do it, know exactly when to do it, when not to do it. So it is a big part of it.
When I see the cameras inside your cars and I see the steering, I can't believe you keep those things on the track.
Me neither.
I mean, is that really what you're doing all the way around?
Yeah, you're constantly on the limit of the grip of the tire. That's our job, is to find that limit and keep the cars close to that limit as possible. And we were speaking earlier that one of the big things is the camera really doesn't do it justice.
Yeah.
If you can see a movement in the car from outside, if you can see it on TV, magnify that by 10, and that's what it feels like in the car. We'll watch some footage from oval tracks especially. You'll see the tiniest little steering adjustment that you were watching, it wouldn't even register that something had happened. And a driver would be like, oh my God, that was close. Because it's that little bit of motion when you're doing those speeds and you're that much on the edge is everything.
Yeah. What goes through your mind? This is a silly question, and I hope you'll treat it seriously. You do. Accidents are part of the trade. Mm-hmm. What are you thinking when your car's spinning around out there?
Usually it's, oh bleep, this is going to hurt. It really depends. There's as drivers are silly people in general, and you always think that you can save it. So you fight it until the last possible second, right? You go down swinging, but there's inevitably a moment where you accept, okay, there's nothing I can do. I'm going to hit something here, and you try and relax. That's what they tell you to do. Let go of the steering wheel.
Yeah.
If you can think, this is the hardest one. So if you spin out on an oval and you're going to the wall backwards, that's like the worst thing that happens. So hitting the wall backwards on an oval it just sucks. But it's part of the sport. And one of the things they tell you is if you're going in backwards, lean back into the seat. Okay? I want to try and explain to you how unnatural leaning backwards is
Into
when
an
you're
accident.
going backwards into a wall.
Yeah.
You want to do this.
Yeah.
And you do it once.
Yeah.
You do it once, and I did it the first time I spun an oval, and I was going backwards into the wall. I did this, and what happens is your head gets the whiplash effect.
Yeah.
Your head actually strikes the back of the car with more G-force than the car hits the wall.
Yeah.
I pulled all the muscles in the front of my neck, got a concussion, and learned that one pretty quick. That once the moment, the best thing you can do is be like, yeah, all right. And it's really hard to do, but in one side of things, on one hand, everything just slows down so much, and you can pick out the weirdest details from the time from when you lose the car to when you hit. And at the same time, it happens so fast. When they ask you what happened, you're not quite sure what happened. It's a weird feeling.
I've been wanting to ask this question of a racing driver for years. How do you handle the human input and output?
So we get 3 questions all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, the 3 most popular questions. How fast do you go?
Yeah.
Does it hurt when you crash?
Yeah.
People actually ask this question. And what do you do if you have to go to the bathroom?
Yeah.
It's a great question. It's not a silly question at all. When you got to go, Fred, you go. I mean, it's the reality of it is, if you have a very full bladder and you have a high G impact, it can rupture.
Yeah.
And that can actually be very, very dangerous for you.
Yeah.
So the doctors tell you, pride's got to take a back seat. If you got to go, you got to go.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. It's not the glamorous life you thought it was, is it?
I would have some people in this audience who'd be very upset with me if I didn't ask you about Dancing with the Stars. They waited and waited, and finally were there. So
You just lured them to stay until.
yeah, that's right. They would have gone home if we hadn't talked about this. So, was it last year?
Yeah, it was a year ago.
You were dancing with an Australian ballroom dancer who was very attractive, and you did very well.
Yeah, yes. I don't really rate myself being good at anything, dancing included, but the fact that we made it to second place on that show is, I mean, this was my dancing experience before the show. That was it, right here. Yeah. Lived right here, usually after a couple tequila shots. Yeah. That was it. So the fact we made it that far was pretty.
And you got huge praise from the judges. And one of the comments was that you were the best male dancer the show has ever seen.
Paid her the same way I paid these kind of people right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Well, congratulations. That
thank you very
obviously rounded out your image a bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a very different demographic from the people normally tuning in on a Sunday afternoon to an IndyCar race, and so exposed myself in the sport to a whole new group of people, which was great. And I had kind of a high bar set for me because 10 years ago, Elio Castroneves, another IndyCar driver, had gone on the show and he won the thing. So IndyCar drivers had a pretty good reputation on the show. I didn't want to let us, down as a brotherhood. So, it was a lot of hard work. When they call you to ask you if you want to do the show and get you to sign up for it, what they do is they blatantly lie to you. About what it takes and how many hours are involved in the whole process. Because if you knew ahead of time, you wouldn't say yes. And I wanted to work hard, and I'm a competitive person. So after the first dance, and all of a sudden there was like scores, and there was a scoreboard, and you were ranked.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, we're not just stepping around a dance floor here. There's some going on back. Now I get it. All right, let's get to work.
I checked online. Sharna Burgess has been doing this a lot for several years. Her score with you was the highest score that she's ever received.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
There you go.
So congratulations.
We'll take it.
When I first made contact with your assistant, and she answered as assistant to the mayor, I thought...
She didn't answer the phone like that, did she?
I thought maybe I was calling a municipal office. Yeah. So you have been branded or branded yourself with this Hinchtown concept, and you're the mayor. Where did the idea come from?
A case of beer. The latter half of the case, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
No, so motorsports took a big shift in 2003 because in 2003, tobacco sponsorship was banned.
Yes.
Tobacco advertising was banned. Motorsports was fueled by cigarettes. So sponsorship became very, very hard to find. And I was counseled very early on by a gentleman who'd been in the sport forever. He said, look, you're a great driver, and that's awesome. There are lots of great drivers.
Yeah.
Sponsorship is what makes this world go round. You have to stand out off track because there's a lot of guys that can drive the car fast. So why is a company going to give you money instead of somebody else? Why are they going to sponsor you? And so I was always very cognizant of the off track side of the sport and kind of the brain that you have to build in order to be relevant off track.
Right.
And with this same gentleman, we sat in the basement of an office in Ludington, Michigan, and case of beer, and came up with this idea of something totally different. You know, we looked at drivers' websites, and back in 2004, whatever this was, 2005, websites weren't quite what they are today.
Right.
And we looked at IndyCar, NASCAR, Formula One, all these different drivers' websites, and we came to two conclusions. One, they were all exactly the same, and two, they all sucked. So we're like, what can be better than this? And after some spitballing, Hinchtown was created, and the idea that I'd be the sort of self-proclaimed mayor of this made-up world came to be. And I mean, it caught on. Now I'm introduced as the mayor of Hinchtown as much as I am James Hinchcliffe.
Yeah. Final question. What's the future hold for James Hinchcliffe?
Well, I mean, as we've discussed, this business is like this. So I'd like to, ideally, I'm in IndyCar for the foreseeable future. You know, I'd like to have I think I've got another 10 years in me, to be honest. And, in the immediate future, we've got an announcement coming out about the next couple years, next week, actually. So, stay tuned for more info. But the future, hopefully, is continuing to live the dream and be an IndyCar driver and kind of deal with real life once the fairy tale stops.
Well, you've been a fascinating guest, and I'll thank you in a moment. I just want to thank our audience. You've been a great audience tonight. Thank you for being so attentive and so spontaneous. I want to thank our sponsor for this program this evening, Midland Honda. We very much appreciate that support. And I want to thank RBC Dominion Securities. Kathy Bales, thank you so much. Your assistant, Janet. And thank you to RBC Commercial Group and to the RBC Retail Group. We appreciate your sponsorship. James, this has been great. You've done very well at keeping yourself in check, and I find you a fascinating person. So
Thank you, sir.
On behalf of everybody who's here, I want to congratulate you on the success you had. We're very proud to have you representing Canada on the IndyCar circuit. And thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And to our host, ladies and gentlemen, 69 Show Strong. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.